accurately, but as long as you understand their point, then you can praise the ideas that they're saying, and also say, that was great, you communicated your point to me and I understood what you were trying to say. So that's a really important thing, being relaxed, and that's part of building this safe classroom environment. In a physical classroom, you want to make sure you're making eye contact. Someone was saying this before, standing where everyone can see you, not always on the left or always on the right. In an online classroom, make sure your video is on. It's easier to make eye contact in an online classroom, but obviously keeping your video on as well. So this is more about, you know, your body language. Make sure it's open, and that it's a comfortable place to be. I think this is a really important. This is about respect. You know, if a student is talking, don't let anyone else interrupt them. And certainly as a teacher, don't interrupt them. Let them get their thought out, let them finish their idea. Pay attention to them. You know, if a student is speaking to you, don't start kind of looking at the register or your records, or start writing on the blackboard, or start typing for the next part of the lesson. Listen to what they're saying. Be authentic. Respond genuinely to what they are saying. Don't just say, oh yeah, very good. Okay, the way we interact with students is so important. Okay. Praising students, we all do this, I'm sure, but it's also about being genuine with the praise that we give. Okay, if we're being specific in our praise, then it means more to our students. If we give every student a yes, well done, yes, well done, yes, well done, it becomes quite meaningless after a while. So if you can say, yes, fantastic, I really liked how you used that phrase, or I liked how you included that example, okay, or you pronounced that word very well. So being specific with our praise, again, being genuine. And the last one I've got here is a very simple one: smile. Okay, this is an easy, I think it's an easy one to do, and it makes your students feel more comfortable and confident to speak. Okay, Namala's got some more ideas here. Fantastic. Small informal talks, making it a safe place. The classroom should be a safe place where they can interact with you in a language that they don't have fluency in yet. That's why they are learning. These are some techniques and some ideas. And sometimes it's hard to judge for ourselves which ones we are using, which ones we're not, where we could improve. So I really encourage you to record yourself, or get a colleague to observe you, and to get them to focus on one or two of these ideas and to listen to their feedback. And then you can do them the same favor. Take time to reflect. How do you build rapport? Rapport isn't just built in the first class, it's every class, every day. How do you keep that relationship going? Okay. So I'm going to move on. Okay. So building the right environment is having that good, positive relationship. It's also about creating an environment where there's a lot of language. A lot of you mentioned in the survey that you were conscious that students don't have many opportunities to practice English. It's not spoken at home, but just because it's not spoken at home, it doesn't mean that you can't make school and the classroom a rich environment for language. Okay, so I think this was clear. Everyone understood the importance of creating a language-rich environment. So they're around the students, they understand its importance, and they feel safe using it. So some quick tips and tricks. So I think these are things that we can all do quite easily. So some of them are like using more classroom language. Make sure you are using English in the classroom for instructions. Open the book at page, whatever. Your small talk at the beginning of a lesson. Good morning, how are you? Using classroom English yourself. Make good use of classroom displays. Get the students to create posters in English. You can put them around the walls. Get them to bring in interesting articles in English in newspapers or magazines that they found interesting. You can use those as displays as well. With displays, you do need to keep changing them. Make sure you don't have the same posters up the whole year. Make sure you're changing them every month or so that there's new content, and so it's all around them. Don't be afraid of using students' home languages as well, because that's part of providing them support and confidence. Can they use their home languages to start brainstorming? Then can they use a mix of home languages and English when they're narrowing down what they want to use and how they're going to say it? And then they can use English in the formal presentation, for example. Different ways of using home languages. Let students take the lead. Nothing better for their confidence than if they're taking the lead. Okay. There are different ways you can do that as well. And create opportunities to speak. So we can recognize that maybe students don't have many opportunities to speak at home in English, but we can create a lot of opportunities in the classroom. So the classroom should be filled with student voices, not just the teacher voice. We can also create opportunities to use English at home by providing them with links to games, activities, quizzes from authentic English sites. And I can share with you a few at the end. So let's talk. Okay, so this we've been talking about creating an environment which is supportive. So that's building positive rapport with our students, lots of different techniques to do that. So building positive rapport with our students so that they feel comfortable in the classroom, they don't worry about making mistakes, and creating a language-rich environment. Okay, making sure that in the physical classroom, they've got displays everywhere, whether it's online or physical, English is the main language and everyone is using English, including the teacher. But at some points, you may want to use home languages as well, so that they're still thinking in both languages and they're working in the two. So creating language-rich environments. So let's think about speaking activities. So here are some quick guidelines for communicative activities, and I think you'll all agree with these. Fundamentals. Check that students understand the instructions of what you want them to do. Okay, they can't produce language, they can't answer the question, complete the project, or do the task if they don't know what to do. So you're not going to get any English apart from unless they understand the instructions. So check the instructions. You can give the instructions in English, try and check them in English, but you may need to check them in other languages too. That's fine. Monitor the activity that's going on. You know, take a back seat. If you're in a physical classroom, maybe you stand against the wall and you listen to one group, making notes of language use. In an online classroom, you might have breakout rooms, visit each of the breakout rooms, be a silent observer of what is happening in the breakout room, or in the groups in a physical classroom. Listen to the language that they're using. Don't interrupt it, but make notes. And remove the pressure of speaking, okay? So let them speak as they want in their groups, being a silent observer. Some students are comfortable stretching themselves and reaching for new language, trying out language that they've just learned about. Other students might want to spend time consolidating with language that they're already comfortable with. So sometimes it's more appropriate to let them repeat phrases that they know very well. Sometimes you can encourage them to stretch themselves more. Sometimes the least confident students just need that more time with language which is familiar to them, and that's fine. So let them do that, and they can probably express lots of different ideas using a limited amount of language and expressions. Encourage funny answers. If they're laughing and having fun, they won't be so self-conscious, okay? If you're, for example, in an English classroom and you're drilling some phrases or pronunciation, get them to do the drills with feeling sleepy, feeling angry, feeling hungry, feeling tired, feeling cold, shouting, whispering. Get them to play with the language in different ways. So that's general guidelines. These are probably quite familiar to a lot of you, but they're fundamentals. Let them be, make sure they understand the task, they can use language that they know well, make sure you are listening to the language that they're using, and encourage them to be silly or funny with the answers that they give. So that it's a light-hearted classroom environment. So let's talk more about scaffolding. This is a really important concept. Okay, does it? So if you have an idea of what scaffolding is, do you want to put in the chat what you think it is? There are different ways of talking about scaffolding, and we might all have a different conception of what it means. But it's an interesting idea which we're going to explore a bit in the next few slides. So getting a few responses here now. So Ravati is saying support. Okay. Supporting the learner of language structures, vocabulary. Thank you, Bhavna. Okay. So I think, we've got keywords here. Support, platform, okay, help to learn, but only when it's necessary. Guiding. Okay, so we've got the concept is quite clear. I think support, guiding, it's like a ladder. That's really nice. I should have tried to find a ladder. Levels of structure in learning. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think one of the original definitions from the 70s by a person called Brunner was the steps taken to reduce the degree of freedom in carrying out some tasks so that the child can concentrate on the difficult skill that they are acquiring. I've simplified it here. So I was saying providing a lot of support for learners at the beginning of a task, and then gradually giving learners more freedom as they become more confident and competent in the language needed to complete the task. Okay, so we can think about a task as, the support we give. The more support we give, the less freedom the student has. Okay, if we say to a class, okay, I want you to create a magazine for the school, and if that is the only instruction, we're giving them a great deal of freedom and no support, and we're going to get very mixed results. If we take them through each individual step, each individual stage, we're minimizing the freedom and giving them more support, and we'll end up with perhaps a more polished final product. So you can think about scaffolding in that sense of providing support, but as you provide support, you're often taking away a little bit of freedom. And what you want to be doing is gauging where the learners are, gauging how much support is needed. As one of the people was saying, I've forgotten the name who said it, but only when necessary. Okay, so you don't need to provide a lot of support to a high level group, because that is going to be limiting. Okay, so the amount of support they need is something you need to judge, and then you take away that support as the stages go on. If you do the task again, or it's a next stage in the task, which bits of support can you take away? So we're going to look at some scaffolding techniques. Again, as before, I'm going to talk about different techniques here. You can add your own ideas of how you can offer support in the chat, okay? So the first thing that you can do is, for every lesson you give, you will have outcomes. You'll think about the aims of the lesson for yourself and for the learners, and what you want the students to achieve. What are the outcomes? One thing you can do is make sure you tell the students the outcomes. What are the outcomes of the activity, of the lesson? That will help them understand why you are doing it. Okay, that can be really useful in providing them some understanding of what the purpose is, and that will help them use the language in a more proactive way. You can think about time. Okay, so this is in several ways. Okay, making sure students have time to plan. you can do this in different ways. You can get them to think about something silently, get them to reflect on it, give them a particular time where they're just on their own thinking and brainstorming. Then you can use think, pair, share, where they're thinking, they pair up with a partner, they share their ideas, but making sure they have that time. Click might be useful. Oh, sorry, with time also, with time you might need to also make sure you're giving them practice time. So thinking of ideas time, and then practice time, and then production time. Vocabulary, this is probably the way we can most associate with support. We can pre-teach vocabulary, which will be important to complete the activity. You might want to check pronunciation. You might give them sentence stems. This is an area where you need to think about what do they need, what's not so necessary. You can also use multilingual approaches, encourage them in their brainstorming time to think about the language that they're going to need to express their ideas. And if they don't have that language, they can ask for that language from you. And maybe that's best asked in the home language. They can say, well, how do I say this in English? And then you can provide help with that. For younger learners and older ones, visuals might be useful for vocabulary to help them understand what's going on. And models, okay? You are a model as the teacher. You can provide an example. There might be examples, written examples, audio examples that you can play for them. Also your teacher talk, how do you grade the language? Okay. So lots of different scaffolding techniques. Okay. So I'm going to talk through an example of how you might apply this for one particular activity. For example, maybe we want the students to talk about a family photograph. You want them to be able to introduce people in a photograph and talk about what they do. So I'm going to apply some of those techniques to this activity. And some activities you will employ more techniques, some you will employ less. So for example, you could start off by showing a photograph of your own family. Very easy to do if you share your screen. In a class, you might have to crowd around a photograph, not ideal at the moment, but show a photograph of family, get them to guess who the people are, what they like doing, and so on. And then you talk about the people in the photograph, okay? So you model the language. Okay, so this is my mum. She's a doctor. She likes cooking, okay? So you can use the language that you want them to be using, and then you highlight. So you've given the model, and then you can highlight that language if that's necessary. Okay, so the language to introduce someone. This is okay, her name's so-and-so. The kind of language, obviously this is for a lower level class maybe, but at a higher level you might have different language. So model what you want them to do, highlight the language. You can then get them to brainstorm, bring in their own photograph, think about their photograph. What do they want to say? Think about it on their own. And when you're in an online environment, don't be afraid to give them a minute or two, just quiet time. Everyone has their mics off. You can just give them that 1 or 2 minutes silent time, maybe play some background music if that's helpful. It might be, might not be. You get them to brainstorm, think about what they want to say. They have the opportunity to ask you for any words that they might need. And then this think, pair, share idea, they get to share their ideas with their partner, and they can practice describing the people in their photograph to their partner. And then you can go to a wider presentation and production. So there's the different support you could give in this one activity. You might find with some classes you need to give more support, other classes you might need less support, depends on the activity and where the students are. And then you can, obviously another time you might want them to talk about a different kind of photograph, and they'll be using similar language and they can take some of the lessons. And so next time they do that, they won't need so much support. So it's about iteration and repetition as well. Okay. So we've been talking here about supporting the students as they engage in activities. You can support in different ways in terms of the time you give them, the vocabulary you give them, the models, and the outcomes. we're going to just finally talk about mistakes. And as you all kind of rightly guessed, a lot of students are very afraid of making mistakes, and this makes them shy and nervous. There were some people in the pre-webinar survey who said that students are afraid of making mistakes because they are afraid of classmates who might bully or mock them. That's obviously a behavioural issue, which I hope that you and your school are able to manage. But there is a natural fear of making mistakes. We talked about in our building rapport earlier, it's very important that your pupils know that the classroom is a safe space. Mistakes are fine, they're encouraged because they're important. So let's think about mistakes a bit more. We can talk about mistakes in a different way, and there's different terminology here, but we can think of mistakes in two types of mistakes. Sometimes they're called mistakes and errors, sometimes they're called slips and errors. But there are mistakes which are made because students are tired. Or there's a lot of pressure, they have to speak quickly, and they make a mistake. They know the correct language, but they've just made a mistake. It happens to everyone in our own native languages. I've already made quite a few slips myself today. So these kinds of mistakes sometimes need to be corrected, but they're often a result of feeling tired or nervous. But then there are those mistakes, sometimes called errors, where students don't have the language yet to express that idea. And so they're making a guess about the language. Sometimes that guess is just a guess. Sometimes they are making an informed guess. They're trying to work out the rules from rules they already know. So there are different kinds of mistakes. We need to think about the mistakes. Okay. I think oops. I answered the first question without asking you. But so why do learners make mistakes? They make mistakes. Sometimes they get confused with their first language and English, but a lot of mistakes are processing mistakes, which are common, whatever their first language. When you're learning English or any other language, learners make similar mistakes. But they make them because they're tired or nervous, but also they make them because they don't know the language yet. So for exactly, developmental errors, exactly the phrase. So what are the benefits of mistakes? Why are mistakes a good thing? And why should we let students know that mistakes are good things? Because we can tell them that they're good things, but we need to give them a reason why it's a good thing. So please do let me know if any benefits of mistakes. You can write them in the chat, we can just think. So they relearn in a better way later. Mm-hmm. I think, Monica, fantastic. We can't learn without making mistakes. I think, it's a truism that often gets said, if you're not making any mistakes, then you're probably not learning because you can't see the gap. Fantastic. Okay, so Monica is saying, Monica, great, eager to learn more. No, we can know where the students are. So exactly, if we know what mistakes they're making, we know where we need to give more attention in future lessons. We know what we need to clarify. We know what they already know and what they don't know. And so it helps us think about our teaching, and it helps us get to know our students more, which means we can provide more targeted lessons for future. Okay, and as I think you all recognize, they are an essential part of I'm going to stop annotations. I think I can disable annotations. Okay. Yes, mistakes are important. And a couple more comments here. Really useful. Helps to reflect on our lessons. Exactly. And this is another one, really good one. Yes, if they're making mistakes, we can see that they are trying and they're also pushing themselves, which is great. Okay, so mistakes are useful and good. So now I'm going to give you an activity. So here are 4 principles for error correction. Quickly, match the sentence halves. Mistakes are natural. Nice. Okay, I've got a couple of responses so far. Anyone else want to write their answers in the chat? Okay. Great. Okay. This is I would ideally give you a bit more time, but I know my time is a bit short, so I'm going to give you the answers now. I think a few of them got them perfect. I think everyone got at least one. Oh, got one right. Sorry, went too fast there. So here are the guidelines. When you're monitoring students, so you can pick out language that needs correction later on. Also make sure you're, very important, listening for good language so that you can praise good use of language as well. Think about, feedback sandwiches. As we've said before, don't interrupt a student when they're speaking. Don't correct everything. First, that's impossible. And second, is this going to be too confusing? Categorize the mistakes. Think about the ones which are the target of today or which are really needed to achieve the task today. And really important, encourage self-correction as much as possible. I've got some links at the end I can share with you where you can learn more about encouraging self-correction. I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about constructive feedback, and then we'll have time for some questions. Okay, so here are two pieces of feedback. Are these pieces of feedback constructive? Quickly type yes or no, or Y or N. Is this constructive feedback? If I say, excellent, Sarah, well done, or that's better than last time, Raj, would you say that this was constructive feedback? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, so most people are saying yes. One person saying no. Okay. For me, these two pieces of feedback are not particularly constructive. The first one is not constructive. It's nice. It's nice to hear, but it's not very constructive. It doesn't give any ideas of how they could. Sarah doesn't know what she's done well. She doesn't know why she's being told well done. The second one is a bit more constructive. Raj knows it's better than last time, but it's not very constructive because Raj doesn't know why it's better than last time. What is better? Okay, and maybe also carries suggestion that it could be even better, but again, Raj doesn't know how to improve it. So here are two more examples, and these are more typical examples of what we might call feedback sandwiches. Okay. So great, Lakshmi. I really like how you ordered the information you gave Anu. It shows you really planned what you were going to say. You used then a lot to show the order of events. Can you think of other ways of saying this? Okay. So you can. So Lakshmi knows it was good. Great. Lakshmi knows what was good. The order of the information, and one thing that they can improve. Okay. So then we've got last one here. Good work, Kamran and Dinesh. You can again see the positive nature of the comment. They worked well together. They did everything, but they didn't use the past tense. So the teacher is pointing out that they could use the past tense to do that. Okay, and I think that is everything I want to cover today. You will get a copy of these slides, and you can look about encouraging feedback and peer correction. But I hope we've talked about, I hope you've got a better understanding of building a good rapport with your students, making classrooms positive and safe, providing support to students in different ways for activities that you use in the classroom, letting students just get on with the task, being specific in your praise and feedback, as we've just seen, and encouraging students to reflect. Okay. For me, I think if students feel supported and relaxed and they're interested, they'll feel motivated and they won't worry about mistakes, and they'll use English more freely. Okay. There are quite a few links here. I'm just going to point out these 4 at the top are authentic materials, good sites with quizzes, games, videos, songs, lots of resources that you can direct your students to. And then there are 6 articles which are really interesting, and I would encourage you to read, and you can see these links. So I think you'll get this presentation at the end. So I'm just going to leave that presentation there. And I'm happy to take any questions that might have come through on the chat.
Yes, Rebecca, we do have some questions. Firstly, thank you so much for that very interesting presentation. I personally learned a lot as well from it. So the first question is from Amarjot. How can we create a language-rich environment in a virtual setup? I think this question is very relevant because nowadays everyone's teaching online. So if you could share your thoughts on the same.
Okay, so I think some of the same principles apply, encouraging English as much as possible in your discussions online. Okay, if they're chatting in the chat box, make that in English. If you're giving instructions, make sure your instructions are English. If you're using material, or they're going to read something, make sure those are in English, the material is in English as well. It doesn't mean you can't provide support in the home languages. That's fine. You might want to use some home languages in the chat or in your instructions to support as needed. But in general, just making sure that everything, as much as possible, is used in English. I think that's the main thing.
Thank you so much. We have one more question. As a school administrator, how do we help our teachers to correct English communication in rural areas specifically?
Okay. So in rural areas, I'm not too sure about the context of the rural learners you might have, but if they have access to the internet, if they're attending lessons online, then maybe they have access to the internet. So there are some great sites like the Learn English Kids site from the British Council. I also put links to the BBC sites, which are specifically aimed for young children and teenagers. If they have access to the internet, they've got English immediately. They might not be able to practice speaking at home so much, but they can certainly read, they can certainly listen. If they don't have access to if they don't have access to the internet at home, or only in small doses, maybe you can send material through WhatsApp. If that's not possible, then it is much more difficult. So you might need to provide worksheets if that's possible. Different rural locations have different internet connectivity, but my answer would be, where possible, rely on the internet because there's a wealth of resources there.
Yes, definitely. I think the problem there is that they don't hear or read English anywhere around them. So it gets more challenging. And then even for the teachers to correct English is challenging because their English is in itself not very correct. So I think that's where the user is coming from.
Okay. Well, the main thing then is, if teachers don't feel so confident themselves, there are lots of ways that they can think about their own English. Use the internet, use radio, listen to different Englishes from around the world, and just notice the differences in different Englishes.
Yes. We have one more question around how do we build vocabulary in students?
Okay. So obviously vocabulary is a really important part. So it will depend if, so I suppose a lot of our audience is subject teachers using English to teach their subject. Depends on the age of your students. If you've got younger students, you're going to use a lot of pictures. You're going to use a lot more mime and gestures. With older students, pictures will also be useful for particular concepts in science or geography, for example. But you might also be using more definitions. You might be encouraging them to use dictionaries, vocabulary. I mean, when we're teaching vocabulary, often comes down to context. That's the critical ingredient. And so if you provide a text or a video which uses the key vocabulary, you don't have to do much teaching. If they can read it and they've got the skill, you teach them how to work out meaning from context, looking at the pictures, looking at the sentence itself, then they'll be able to get a lot of information from the text. So teach them the skills to decode from context, and that will go a long way.
Thank you so much. The next question is, how do we encourage students who are very silent and passive listeners in the classroom?
I think there are a couple of ways you can do this. One, give them time. They might need more time to think, might need more time to plan what they're going to say. Give them that time, and then give them time to practice. So don't immediately expect them to speak in front of the whole class. Give them time to practice on their own, or practice with a partner or in a small group. Then you can build up rehearse it on your own. Maybe you can get them just everyone mumbling to themselves. They can turn off their microphones and just speak to the camera, but turn off their microphones for 1 minute. And then you turn microphones on, and then you can put them in pairs or in small groups. They can practice again. And then finally, they can go to the whole class. But give them time, and don't pressure them to create long speeches. Allow short answers at first, and then they can build on that. And when they do say something, be positive and encouraging, and praise them for making the effort and for achieving that in a small way.
We have just enough time for one last question. This question is from Priyanka from YouTube. She's asking if there is a need to create routines at home with the family so that the child can learn English better at home. And if so, then what can be these routines?
I think this is an interesting question. I like the idea of it. I think, it's something you could certainly suggest to parents. A lot of it will depend on how comfortable the parents and the rest of the family are with English. Certainly when it comes to routines with homework or English time, that would be a great thing to encourage. Is there a certain time of the day where children can spend 10, 15 minutes online watching a video from one of these sites, and then they can tell their parents about it even in English, or they can summarize it in their home language. That's fine too, because they're still processing what they learned or what they heard. So if you are going to suggest routines to parents, obviously you need to be sensitive to whether there is English in the rest of the family or not, and what works for the child, what works for the parents. But it can be as simple as a student kind of reads something, listens to something, and then tells their parents or the rest of the family over dinner what they read or listened to and what was interesting about it, or why they didn't like it.
Yes, thank you so much. We are now at the end of this webinar. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for taking time and sharing with us your expertise. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed the session. I would request you to also please share your thoughts on the webinar today.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and I thank you all for putting your suggestions and comments in the chat. It was really interesting to read those. I feel I rushed through a bit of it, but I hope the main points were there, and I think you're going to share the presentation with them as a PDF so that you can explore that in a bit more detail. And I think I should also say that the next webinar in this series is in January, on the 21st of January, on monitoring and evaluation, which should be a really interesting topic for everyone.
Yes, like Rebecca shared, our next webinar is going to happen on January 21st. So do look out for Firki emails in your inbox for the same. Before you leave, please take a minute to give us feedback on your learning experience on this webinar. This will help us grow and improve our resources for you. Also, once you fill the feedback form, you will be receiving the attendance certificate on your registered email ID. The link to the feedback form is going to be shared on your chat box any minute now. And to reach out to the speaker after the webinar, please write to us at teachenglish.india@britishcouncil.org or follow us on Twitter in British or Facebook English in India. This information is also going to be pasted on the chat window. Please follow at Firki Portal on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter for regular updates. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a very good evening. Please do fill out the feedback form.
Thank you.
Thank you.